I hate working late. The building is different at 2 a.m. It breathes. I was the last one in the office. I packed up my bag, turned off the lights, and stepped into the elevator. I just wanted to go home. I pressed the button for the lobby, but the elevator didn't go down. It lurched upward. The lights on the panel flickered. The digital display scrambled. Then a button I had never seen before lit up at the bottom of the panel. It didn't have a number. It just had a symbol. Before I could hit the emergency stop, the doors opened. The air hit me first. It smelled old, like moist carpet and stale cigarettes. The doors slid open. I expected the marble floor of the lobby. Instead, I was staring down a long, narrow hallway lined with peeling yellow wallpaper. The carpet was a damp, ugly beige, and the sound, bzzzzzzz. The fluorescent lights overhead were buzzing loud enough to make my teeth ache. "Hello," I called out. My voice didn't echo. The carpet swallowed the sound instantly. I tried to press the elevator button to go back, but the doors slammed shut in my face. The panel went dead. I was trapped. I figured it was a maintenance floor, or maybe a basement storage area. I started walking, looking for a staircase or a fire exit. I turned left, then right, then left again. It was a maze. Every hallway looked identical to the last one. Same yellow paper, same buzzing lights. There were no doors, no windows, no fire extinguishers, just walls. I checked my watch. I had been walking for 10 minutes, but I felt like I hadn't moved an inch. Then I saw something on the wall ahead, a shadow, but there was nothing there to cast it. I pulled out my phone to call security. No service. The Wi-Fi list was empty, but the weirdest part was the clock. It didn't say 2015 a.m. anymore. The numbers were spinning rapidly, cycling through digits too fast to read. I tried to open the camera to record this place. The screen went gray. Face ID failed. I felt a cold sweat breaking out on my back. This wasn't just a dead zone. Physics didn't work right here. I put the phone away and yelled, "Is anyone here?" From 3 hallways over, I heard a cough, a dry, human cough. I ran toward the sound of the cough. I found an open doorway, the first one I'd seen. Inside, it looked like a break room from the 1990s. There was a wooden table and a single chair. On the table sat a white ceramic mug. I touched it. It was hot. Steam was rising from the black coffee inside. "Hello?" I looked around the corner. The room was empty. There was only one door. Whoever drank this coffee had been here 30 seconds ago. Where did they go? Then I noticed the writing on the table. Scratched into the wood with a fingernail were the words, "Don't look at the lights." I backed out of the room. This was getting too creepy. I decided to pick a direction and stick to it. If I walked straight long enough, I had to hit an outer wall. I walked briskly down the main corridor. I didn't turn left or right, just straight. I walked for maybe 500 feet. Then I stopped. Directly in front of me was the open doorway. Inside was the table and the steaming coffee. My blood ran cold. I hadn't turned around. I had walked in a straight line. The space curved back on itself. I was in a loop. And from the darkness behind me, the buzzing of the lights suddenly changed pitch. It got deeper, angry. The buzzing sound grew so loud my ears popped. Then the light at the far end of the corridor flickered and died. Click. Then the next one. Click. It wasn't a power failure. It was a sequence. The darkness was moving toward me, bulb by bulb, like something was swallowing the light. I backed away. Click, click, click. The darkness was faster than me. It was hunting me. I turned and sprinted toward the break room, the only place that still had a working light. Just as I dove through the doorway, the hallway behind me plunged into total blackness. I slammed the door and leaned against it, but there was no lock. Through the frosted glass window of the door, I saw a shadow move. It stood right outside. It didn't look like a person. It looked like a scribble, a tall, tangled mess of black static that vaguely resembled a human shape. It didn't breathe. It made a sound like a dial-up modem connecting. Squirt! Beep! A hand long, thin, and made of frayed wires pressed against the glass. The glass began to crack. It wasn't trying to open the door. It was testing the barrier. The glass spiderwebbed. I couldn't fight that thing. I had to run, but there was nowhere to go. I looked up. The drop ceiling. Standard office tiles. I dragged the wooden table under the vent. Smash! The creature's hand punched through the glass door. I scrambled onto the table. I shoved the ceiling tile aside. It lifted easily. I pulled myself up into the dusty crawl space just as the door below burst open. I lay flat on the metal beams, holding my breath. Below me, the creature screeched, a sound of pure digital distortion. It tore the table apart in frustration. The space between the ceiling and the floor above was tight. It smelled of fiberglass and dead rats. I crawled over the metal support beams, trying not to make a sound. Through the gaps in the tiles, I could see the yellow hallway below. The wireman was moving. It glided over the carpet, twitching erratically. It was hunting by sound. Every time a pipe creaked, its head snapped toward the noise. I had to keep moving. I had to find the elevator shaft. If I could get to the shaft, maybe I could climb the cables back to the real world. I crawled for what felt like hours. My knees were raw. Then I hit something soft. I shined my phone light. It was a pile of shredded insulation, a nest, and in the middle of it was a body, or what was left of one. It was a skeleton wearing a blue uniform. I reached out and brushed the dust off the plastic ID badge clipped to the chest pocket. Security, Franklin, XP, 1995. 1995. This guy had been stuck here for 30 years. Next to his hand was a notepad. I opened it. The last page had only one sentence written in shaky handwriting. It listens to the lights. I flipped through Franklin's logbook. Most of it was rambling about the hum, driving him crazy. But the last few pages were instructions. The static man lives in the walls. It feeds on electricity. It follows the current. I looked at the note again. It listens to the lights. It wasn't hunting by sound. It was hunting by energy signature. My phone, the buzzing lights, the elevator panel, that's what drew it. If I wanted to get to the elevator shaft without being eaten, I had to create a distraction. I had to feed it something bigger than me. I found the main junction box for the west wing. Thick black cables pulsed with a low vibration. Franklin's notes said the elevator was in the north. If I killed the power here, the surge might draw the creature to the west. I didn't have wire cutters. I used my house keys to saw through the insulation. Snap! A blue spark blinded me. The lights in the hallway below flickered and died. Immediately, I heard a shriek, that terrible dial-up scream. The wireman was charging toward the blackout. It worked. It was taking the bait. Go, I whispered to myself. Move. I crawled as fast as I could toward the north sector. I found a tile near a sign that said, lifts. I punched the tile out and looked down. Clear. I dropped. Thump. The impact jarred my ankles, but the damp carpet muffled the sound. I stood up. This part of the floor was quieter. The lights were dimmer here, buzzing at a lower frequency. I was standing in front of the elevator doors. The digital display was dead. I pressed the button. Nothing. Of course. I dug my fingers into the rubber seal between the doors and pulled. They were heavy, but they moved. The doors groaned open. I expected to see the top of the elevator cabin. There was nothing, just a black concrete throat going up and down forever. I shined my light down. No bottom. I shined it up. No top, just endless darkness and rusted guide rails. This building only had 20 floors. This shaft looked like it went to the core of the earth. "Where am I?" I whispered. There were no cables attached to a car. The elevator I rode in, it didn't exist here. But on the wall of the shaft, just out of reach, was a rusted maintenance ladder. I didn't have a choice. I took a breath and jumped. My hands grasped the cold, greasy metal of the ladder. I swung out over the void. I didn't look down. I started climbing. 1 rung, 2 rungs. My breathing echoed in the shaft. I climbed for 5 minutes until my arms burned. I paused to rest. That's when I heard it. Sk, below me. I looked down. 3 floors below, the elevator doors had been forced open. A blue, crackling light was spilling into the shaft. The wireman had found the open door. It knew where I went. It began to climb the wall, moving like a spider made of lightning. The static scream was getting louder. I pulled myself up another 10 feet. The blue light from the creature was casting my shadow long and distorted against the concrete wall. I saw a small service landing and a grey steel door. I swung off the ladder and landed on the metal grate. I grabbed the door handle. Locked! Squirt! The wireman was only 20 feet below me. I could smell the ozone. I slammed my shoulder into the door. Once, twice. The rusted latch gave way. I stumbled inside and slammed the door shut, sliding the heavy deadbolt home just as a fist made of lightning hammered against the metal from the other side. The pounding on the door stopped. The steel was thick enough to mask my electrical signature. I turned around. I wasn't in a hallway anymore. I was standing on the edge of an office, a massive, endless ocean of grey cubicles. It stretched as far as I could see. Thousands of identical workstations. The ceiling was so high I couldn't see it. Just a black void hanging over the partition walls. The silence here was different. It wasn't dead silence. It was the hum of 1,000 computer fans spinning in unison. The computers were on. I walked down the first aisle. "Is anyone here?" No answer. Just the soft whir of the machines. I approached the nearest desk. There was a nameplate, Employee 4429. No name, just a number. The old CRT monitor was glowing blue. I touched the mouse. The screen flickered. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a video feed. I saw a ladder. I saw a man climbing it, looking terrified. It was me. This was a recording from 5 minutes ago. I clicked the next window. It showed the hallway with the yellow wallpaper. I clicked another. It showed this desk, right now. I was looking at the back of my own head on the screen. Something was filming me. I spun around. The webcam on the monitor stared at me like a glass eye. I backed away from the computer. Then I saw movement. 3 rows down, someone was sitting at a desk. A man in a white shirt and tie. He was typing. Click, clack, click. "Hey!" I ran toward him. "Hey, I need help!" The man didn't stop typing. I grabbed his shoulder and spun his chair around. "Listen to me!" I froze. It wasn't a man. It was a mannequin. Smooth, peach-colored plastic where a face should be. No eyes, no mouth. But its plastic fingers were still moving, hitting the keys. Click, clack. It was working. It was pretending to be alive. I let go of the plastic shoulder. Suddenly, a chime echoed through the vast space. "Bing bong!" A pleasant, automated female voice spoke from the darkness above. "Attention staff! Break time is over. Please return to your assigned tasks." Unauthorized visitors must be processed by HR. The typing stopped. All around me, in every cubicle, chairs squeaked. The mannequin in front of me stood up. To my left, another one stood up. To my right, another. Hundreds of them rose from their desks in perfect unison. They didn't have faces, but I felt them looking at me. They stepped out into the aisle. Processing. The mannequin in front of me whispered, its plastic head tilting. I didn't wait for processing. I kicked the mannequin in the chest. It fell back with a hollow clack, knocking over two others. I ran. Behind me, the sound of hundreds of plastic feet hitting the carpet erupted. Thump, thump, thump. They weren't fast, but they were everywhere. They poured out of the cubicles like water. "HR is waiting!" a mechanical voice screeched from the ceiling speakers. I hurdled a desk, knocking over a stack of papers. I looked back. They were climbing over each other, a wave of grey suits and plastic limbs, blindly grasping for me. They didn't want to kill me. They wanted to file me. I turned a corner and ran straight into one. It had been crouching under a desk. It stood up instantly, blocking my path. I tried to dodge, but its hand shot out. Plastic fingers clamped around my bicep. It felt like a steel trap. The plastic was hard and cold, but the hydraulic strength behind it was terrifying. "Submit Form 99, it whispered from a speaker in its neck. "Let go!" I screamed. I grabbed a heavy stapler from the desk and smashed it into the mannequin's head. Crack. The plastic skull fractured, but it didn't let go. I had to stomp on its knee joint to snap the leg backward before it finally released me. I scrambled away, my arm throbbing. The swarm was closing in from all sides. Then I saw it. Rising above the sea of grey cubicles like an island was a raised platform. On top of it sat a large, glass-walled office, the executive suite. It was the only room that looked real. The lights inside were warm and golden, not the harsh fluorescent buzz of the floor. It was my only chance. I scrambled up the stairs to the platform. The mannequins reached for my ankles, their plastic fingers scratching against my shoes. I reached the heavy glass door. It had a gold nameplate, "The Manager." I threw myself inside and slammed the door. I twisted the lock. Click. A split second later, the first wave of mannequins hit the glass. Thud. I backed away, terrified the glass would shatter. But they stopped. They pressed their smooth, faceless heads against the window, staring blindly into the room. They didn't pound on the glass. They didn't try to break it. They just stood there, waiting. They weren't allowed in here. This was management territory. I turned around to face the room. It smelled of mahogany and expensive cigars. A massive oak desk sat at the far end, with a high-backed leather chair facing away from me. "Hello?" I called out. "I'm not an employee! Let me out!" The leather chair slowly squeaked and spun around. I raised my fists, ready to fight. But the chair was empty. Well, almost empty. Sitting in the center of the leather seat was an old black rotary telephone. The cord trailed off into the darkness under the desk. Silence filled the room. The mannequins outside watched. Then the phone rang. "Bang!" It was a loud, physical bell sound that made me jump. "Bang!" I walked slowly toward the desk. My hand trembled as I reached for the receiver. I picked it up and put it to my ear. "Hello?" a voice answered. It was my own voice. "You are late for your performance review, Jack." My hand gripped the phone until my knuckles turned white. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. The voice on the other end was mine, but it lacked emotion. It sounded like a recording of me speaking. "We have been watching your progress, Jack. You show initiative. You survived the lobby. You survived the staff. Let me go," I begged. "Go?" The voice chuckled, a dry, static sound. "Why would you leave? We have a permanent position open for you. No more commute, no more rent. You can stay here. Forever." Through the glass walls, the mannequins all tilted their heads to the left simultaneously. They were waiting for me to say yes. They were the previous employees who accepted the offer. "I don't want the job," I yelled. I slammed the receiver down onto the cradle. Slam! The warm, golden light of the office instantly died, replaced by a flashing crimson emergency strobe. "Whoop! Whoop! Whoop! Termination processed," the female voice announced from the ceiling. "Security alert!" The glass walls around me began to fracture. Crack. The mannequins outside weren't just watching anymore. They were pounding on the glass, their plastic fists hammering in a rhythmic, deafening beat. They were coming in to escort me out. I looked around frantically. There was no back door. I was trapped in a glass box with an angry mob outside. The glass behind me shattered. A plastic hand grabbed my jacket. I threw myself under the massive oak desk. My foot caught on the edge of the thick Persian rug. It bunched up, revealing something metallic underneath. A hatch. It was a maintenance access panel, stamped with the logo Systems. I clawed at the latch. It was stiff with rust. Above me, the mannequins were swarming the desk, overturning the chair. "Get him!" a distorted voice screeched. I kicked the latch with my heel. Clang! It popped open. I didn't look to see where it went. I pulled the grate up and dropped into the darkness just as a dozen plastic hands grabbed at my legs. I was falling. It wasn't a ladder, it was a chute. A smooth metal laundry chute that spiraled down into the bowels of the building. I slid violently, bouncing off the metal sides. Bang! Bang! The air grew hotter. The smell of mahogany and ozone was replaced by the smell of sulfur and wet concrete. I was going deep. Deeper than the parking garage, deeper than the foundation. I tried to brace my legs to slow down, but the angle was too steep. I saw a faint orange glow approaching at the bottom. "Brace!" I screamed to myself. I shot out of the end of the tube and hit a hard, wet floor. I rolled across the damp concrete, gasping for breath. My suit was torn. My hands were bleeding. I stood up slowly. I was in the basement. But like the office upstairs, this wasn't normal. It was a cathedral of industry. Massive, rusted pipes the size of subway cars ran along the walls, pulsing with heat. Thump! 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 The pipes sounded like they were carrying a heartbeat. Steam hissed from loose valves, creating a thick, orange fog. The mannequins wouldn't follow me here. This place was too dirty for them. But I wasn't alone. From the shadows of the pipes, I heard the sound of metal scraping on concrete. Something heavy was dragging itself toward me. I dove behind a cluster of pipes just as the figure stepped into the light. It was massive. Standing 7 feet tall, it wore a grey jumpsuit so stained with oil and grime it looked like stiff leather. Its face was hidden behind a rusted iron welding mask. It didn't walk, it stomped. The ground shook with every step. Clang, clang! It was dragging a pipe wrench the size of a sledgehammer behind it. This was the janitor, the one who cleans up the mess. It stopped near a leaking valve. Instead of fixing it, it raised the wrench and smashed the pipe, sealing the leak by crushing the metal flat. It wasn't fixing the building, it was beating it into submission. I held my breath, watching through the gap in the pipes. The janitor walked over to a large metal bin marked "Terminated Staff." He reached in with one massive gloved hand and hoisted a black trash bag onto his shoulder. The bag moved. I saw the outline of a hand pressing against the plastic. Someone or something was inside, alive and struggling. The janitor didn't care. He walked toward a wall of fire at the far end of the room. The incinerator. He tossed the squirming bag onto the conveyor belt leading into the flames. I had to move. If he found me, I'd be in the next bag. I tried to crawl backward, aiming for a service ladder. But the boiler room was a minefield. My elbow bumped a rusted valve wheel. It spun loose. Hiss! 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 A jet of scalding steam shot out, hitting my arm. Arg! I clamped a hand over my mouth, but it was too late. The sound echoed through the cavernous room. At the incinerator, the janitor froze. Slowly, mechanically, the rusted welding mask turned in my direction. There were no eyes behind the slit, just darkness. He let out a low, guttural roar that sounded like grinding gears. He raised the giant wrench and charged. I ran. I didn't look back. I just sprinted through the maze of hot metal. Behind me, I heard the heavy boots gaining ground. Thump! 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 Get back to work! The janitor roared. I ducked under a low pipe just as the giant wrench swung over my head. Crash! The tool hit a concrete support pillar, shattering it into dust. The force of the blow shook the floor. He was slow, but he was unstoppable. He smashed through pipes, valves, and railings, destroying anything in his path to get to me. I saw the ladder ahead. It led up to a catwalk above the incinerator. It was my only way out. I grabbed the rusted rungs and scrambled up. The heat was intense. The incinerator was right below me, a roaring pit of orange fire that smelled of burning plastic. I felt the ladder shake. I looked down. The janitor had grabbed the bottom of the ladder. With a roar, he ripped the bolts right out of the concrete wall. The ladder swung backward, hanging over the fire. I lunged for the catwalk railing. My fingers wrapped around the cold steel. I pulled myself up, kicking my legs wildly. The ladder fell into the fire below. I lay on the grating, coughing in the smoke. The janitor stood below, shaking his wrench at me, unable to reach the high walkway. I was safe from him, but now I had to cross the fire. The heat on the catwalk was unbearable. My shoes were starting to melt on the grating. I saw a maintenance hatch on the wall labeled Roof Exhaust. I kicked the latch until it broke. Clang! I squeezed my body into the square metal tunnel. It was tight, barely wider than my shoulders. The air rushing past me was hot and smelled of burning trash. I began to crawl upward, digging my elbows into the sheet metal. Below me, I heard the janitor roaring, banging his wrench against the catwalk railing. He couldn't fit in here. I was safe from him, but now I had to climb 20 floors inside a chimney. The shaft went vertical. I found a service ladder bolted to the inside. I climbed for what felt like an hour. I passed a vent grate looking into the 10th floor. I stopped to peek through the slats. It was a conference room. A dozen figures were sitting around a long mahogany table. They were wearing expensive suits, but they weren't mannequins. They were skeletons, dusty, cobweb-covered skeletons slumped in leather chairs. In the center of the table, a small, black, geometric shape was floating, pulsating with purple light. They were worshipping it, waiting for a meeting that started decades ago. I shuddered and kept climbing. I didn't want to know what the agenda was. I saw moonlight above me, but blocking the exit was a massive industrial exhaust fan. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The blades were spinning fast enough to turn a man into mist. I couldn't stop it. The motor was too powerful. I looked around. A loose metal support strut was hanging from the wall of the shaft. I wrenched it free. It was a solid bar of steel. "Please hold," I whispered. I waited for the rhythm and jammed the steel bar into the blades. Screech! Sparks showered down on me. The motor whined and smoked. The bar bent, but the fan ground to a halt, leaving a gap just big enough to squeeze through. I pushed past the smoking fan blades and pulled myself up onto the wet gravel. Splash! Rain. Cold, beautiful, real rain. I rolled onto my back, letting the water wash the soot and sweat from my face. The air smelled of ozone and wet concrete. No more stale carpet smell, no more buzzing lights. I stood up, my legs shaking. I was on the roof. I had made it. I walked to the edge of the building, ready to look down at the street, wave at a car, maybe scream for help. I just wanted to see a streetlight, a sidewalk, anything real. I grabbed the parapet wall and looked down. My breath stopped. There was no street. There were no cars, no sidewalks, no people. I looked out at the horizon. As far as my eyes could see, in every direction, there were just rooftops, thousands of them, millions of them, an infinite ocean of identical office buildings, all connected, all stretching into the grey mist. There was no ground floor. The building didn't end. It just went on forever. I wasn't in a building in a city. The building was the world. I sank to my knees as the rain poured down, and from the vent behind me, the phone began to ring.